Well, hello and welcome. In today's video, I'll be looking at Porthcawl Harbour and its history in a bit more detail. As you walk around that area, if you look carefully, there's still many remnants from its industrial past and its glory days of the 1860s and 1870s. But before I look at some of these features in a bit more detail, I'll give you a brief history of the harbour itself. Well, this was the original harbour built in 1828. It later became the outer basin for the extended docks built later. It was built in 1828 following an Act of Parliament in 1825 which allowed the building of the Llanvii Valley Horse-drawn tram and the docks themselves, which gave an outlet for the coal and iron from the Llanvii Valley. Well, the original harbour, dating from 1828, was a rectangular tidal basin. The north side was open to the bay itself, and the original entrance for the ships was in the eastern wall over there. Well, one of the few buildings which remain from the early days of Porthcawl Harbour is the warehouse known as the Jennings Building. It was built in the 1830s and stood on the quayside of the new harbour. The docks were further developed in the 1840s, but the main expansion came in the 1860s by John Brogden and Sons. A large inner 7.5-acre harbour was constructed with access via lock gates from the original harbour, which then became the outer basin. The original harbour entrance, which was sited in the eastern wall, was moved to the southern wall where it still stands today, and the original breakwater was extended by 100 yards. This new harbour opened on the 22nd of July 1867. Well, just to give you some idea what impact that new harbour redevelopment had, back in 1864, 17,000 tonnes of coal passed through Porthcawl. By 1871, that figure had jumped to 165,000 tonnes of coal. And by 1874, 700 ships a year were docking in the new Porthcawl Harbour. However, the opening of Barry Docks and Port Talbot Docks in 1898 provided bigger and better facilities and much safer access for the ships. Their opening resulted in an immediate reduction in business for Porthcawl Harbour, and the docks finally closed in 1906. So I'm filming this over a few days, so if you notice a change in weather, a change in tone, you know why. One of the reasons is because I'm looking at some of the original features which you only can see at low tide. And this morning it's high tide, but what it does illustrate is how extreme the tidal range is of the Bristol Channel. If you look behind me, the lock gates there, the water's nearly up to the top, and the mark on the side is showing 23 feet. If you look at the shots I filmed a few days ago at low tide, have a look at these. And that range, that tidal range, that happens twice a day. Well, in 1914, following the closure of Porthcawl Docks, they started filling the inlet harbour, but because of the outbreak of World War I, that was abandoned, and that became Salt Lake Bathing Pool throughout the 1920s and 1930s. It was finally filled in during World War II, and that became what it is today, Salt Lake Car Park. So as mentioned, I've been filming this over a couple of days. The reason being, one, it's been very wet, and two, there's a few things you only can see at low tide. So let's get started, and the first thing we can have a look at is Porthcawl Pier. Well, the original pier was very much shorter than what we see today. On the pier itself, you can find a section of the original horse-drawn tramroad which used to carry the coal. I think the original pier was intended to be longer, but the company ran out of money. It was actually extended by 100 yards in the 1860s, and the lighthouse at the very end, that was finished in 1866. This picture from 1865 shows the pier extension near completion. You can see the wooden frame made out of timber from the Forest of Dean and the stone facing. The concrete reinforcement you can see there today, that was put up in the 1970s. As you can see, the inner side of the pier is made up of 3 tiers. So you've got the lower tier, which is made out of stone, and at low tide you can see where it's been patched up over the years. You've got the second tier, and that's where you can find a section of the original horse-drawn tramway, and then you've got the top tier, which is quite thin. It's like a sea wall, and there's a walkway along the top as well. Records show there was actually a narrow slipway here well before the 1880s, but the current version, the wider version, that was extended during World War II by the RAF Air Sea Rescue Unit, which was based in Porthcawl. At the side of the slipway, you can see where they used bags that must have been filled with dry concrete, and obviously when it's set, you can still see the shapes of the bags here. The lighthouse you can see at the end of the pier dates from 1866. The cast iron hexagonal tower sits on a stone plinth. The original lantern was replaced in 1911 to the current round one you can see now, and the whole structure is about 9 metres in height. It was originally powered by gas, and it wasn't actually converted to electric until 1997. This little building at the start of the pier is the old custom house, and it's believed to date from 1867. It was used for levying duty on imports, including timber, which they used for pit props in the mines. If you look really carefully at the sandstone brickwork, you can see how weathered it's become. It's really heavily weathered. As I mentioned in a previous video, this stretch of coast is very, very dangerous, and there have been many shipwrecks in the area. The first Coast Guard service in Porthcawl dates from the 1830s. However, this lookout tower is believed to date from the redevelopment of the harbour in 1867. It appears on the first edition of the OS map dated 1885. The Grade 2 listed Jennings buildings there, that was built in 1832 by James Allen. He was the proprietor of Deference Spelter Works, and it was the south terminus of the Deference in the horse-drawn tram roads, and it's the only building that survives from the original harbour development. On the 1846 tide map, The building simply described as a warehouse belonging to the Iron Company. The name Jennings doesn't actually occur until 1911, when it was used by the Jennings & Co. timber importers. During World War II, the RAF Air Sea Rescue Unit used it as a base. But when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, the building was a bit of a mess. It was run down. I think the council had a depot there. And in the 90s, again, it was an indoor skate park, but the building was a bit of a mess. But luckily, it's now been redeveloped. There's apartments on the first floor, and on the ground floor, they've got a pizza restaurant, a restaurant and bar, coffee shop. So it's actually useful now, somewhere to come. So this is the harbour as you see it today, and this used to be the outer basin for the harbour dated from 1867. If you look at the far wall, you can still see where the lock gates used to be, and that used to lead into the 7.5 acre inner floating harbour. There are still quite a few of these stone bollards around the harbour, and if you look carefully, you can still find quite a few iron mooring rings on the harbour walls. If you look carefully at the western side of the harbour, you can still see some of the original features. There's an old archway that used to be an opening and has since been blocked up. Those steps in the northwest corner are from the original harbour. If you look, you can see there's 2 steps cut out of each block, and below that you can see the natural outcropping rock. I've now made it a Salt Lake car park, and as you can see, there's not much here at the moment. This was the site of the inner harbour, the inner floating harbour, which was developed in the 1860s. Before that, the bay just curved around. Despite the expansion, there was an increase in traffic through Porthcawl, but it never really fulfilled its potential. Entering the harbour was notoriously difficult. The weather along this coast is quite bad as well, which made it even more difficult. And the tides, because of the high tides, the extremes between the high and low tide, there was a very small window where the ships could enter or leave the harbour. It was only a matter of time before Porthcawl lost out to the harbours being developed at Port Talbot and Barry Docks. I think I mentioned earlier, the inner harbour started to be filled in 1914, but it stopped because of World War I, and this area then became a boating lake and a swimming lake, hence the name Salt Lake. It was finally filled in during World War II, and since that date it's been known as Salt Lake Car Park, and it's just a bit of waste ground really. It only ever gets used during the summer months, busy bank holidays. The rest of the time, and all the time I lived here, it's this. Like most towns, there's arguments. They can't decide what to do with the place, and I'm pretty sure long after I'm gone, they'll still be arguing what to do with the place. That was a look at Porthcawl Harbour and its history. And if you want to see more of Old Porthcawl, have a look at the video that's coming up at the end. Porthcawl Then and Now. We look at places around the town and how they changed over time. Alternatively, if you want to see more of myself and Mel, have a look at one of our other travel videos. We travel all over the world, from Tenby in West Wales all the way to Las Vegas, Santa Monica, California. So we'll see you in one of those. So bye for now.